Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on YouTube today. And thanks for watching, I really appreciate it also. And too, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Some of them are even watchable. Give this video a thumbs up. This is gonna be my last top 10 video of the regular season. May do one after next week. We'll see how that goes. But I'm gonna do it a little different today. You guys have been following along with me this season here on YouTube. You know I've done one of these videos every single Monday or Tuesday during the week for the entire college football season. And I've been sticking to pretty much the same formula every single week, right? I move teams up and down based on current week's performance and sort of put teams where I think they should be ranked based on how they did the previous week or whatever. Gonna do it a little bit different today. Since the regular season is over, in the books, all 12 games have been played by almost all the teams. A few teams have games, makeup games scheduled for this coming weekend because they had to cancel games due to weather earlier in the season. Games like I think South Carolina, who knew they would have nothing else to do this coming weekend, with it being championship weekend. So no big deal for them to go ahead and schedule a makeup game on championship Saturday. And several other teams did the same thing too. So I'm gonna do it a little bit different today. My final top 10 poll, or final regular season top 10 poll, I'm gonna list 10 teams in order from 1 to 10 that I think are currently the best 10 teams in America. So there's gonna be some teams ranked here in this top 10 that you're gonna say, that's crazy, they don't deserve to be there, they lost to whatever. I'm talking about right now, today, the 10 best teams. So I'm not basing this off of any one win, any one loss. I'm not basing this off of last week's performance. This is based off what I've seen for the entirety of the college football season and where I feel teams should be ranked within the top 10 based on who would beat who. And that's pretty much the criteria I looked at when working on this poll. So the team that I have ranked number 10, I think would lose to the team ranked number 9. The team ranked 9, I think would lose to 8. And the opposite is true. The team that's number 1, I feel like would beat or be favored against team number 2. I feel like team number 2 could beat or would be favored on a neutral field against team number 3, etc., so on and so forth. In addition to all that as well, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Yee! I couldn't help it. I had to do it one time. But anyway, have I wasted enough time? Yeah, top 10. All right, here we go. Now, usually I would put last week's top 10 poll up on the screen right now so we would have it to look at to compare to this week's top 10. But like I said, I'm doing it totally different this week. So last week's top 10 really doesn't affect where the teams are ranked at in my poll this week. So I'm not going to put last week's poll up. We're just going to go with this week's poll. I'll put it well, I don't know where you want it. Here. Okay, we'll go with here. All right. So I'm going to start with number 10, I guess, and work the way down. And I'm not going to lie. 8, 9, and 10 were very hard for me. 1 through 7, I actually did pretty quickly this morning. I made an initial poll. I might have made 1 or 2 changes to the top 7, but I did the top 7 pretty quick. But 8, 9, and 10 were pretty difficult for me. Before I reveal number 10, though, I want to go ahead and spoil something here. Central Florida's not on this list. I've had Central Florida in my top 10 since the preseason. I had them at number 10 pretty much all season long. I think I moved them up to 9 a couple of weeks ago. Maybe might have had them at 8 last week. I do not think Central Florida is a top 10 team in terms of who would beat who. I don't think Central Florida could beat any team in my list of top 10s. Obviously, any team can beat any team on any given day. I understand all that. And, you know, they beat Auburn last year. That's great. Their quarterback is done. Milton McKenzie, he was the best player on that team. Definitely the best player on the offense. He was one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in America, in my opinion. I hate that he got injured. I know the playoff committee and stuff like that takes injuries into account when they do their polls, and they don't punish teams and blah, blah, blah. But like I said, my criteria for this poll is right now, today, who could beat who. And I don't think Central Florida would be favored against any of these teams I have in my top 10. Obviously, I could be wrong. If you're a Central Florida fan, I'm not trying to disrespect Central Florida. Like I said, I've had them in my top 10 the entire season. So I've been giving them way more respect than the average college football fan. But for the purposes of this poll, I left them out, okay? So for number 10, it came down to me between Washington and Washington State. I felt like I needed to put the Pac-12 somewhere. Everyone knows the Pac-12 has been a disappointment this year. They're way down. They don't really have any elite teams. They've got 2, maybe 3 good teams / really good, and then a bunch of 6 and 7 win type talented teams. They're just not a good conference. But it came down to me between Washington and Washington State. They just played last week. Washington won. Washington State's got the better record overall. Washington won the division. You could go either way here. I know Washington just beat Washington State, but like I said, I'm not basing this poll off of any one game. But I do think Washington is the better team. I guess give me Washington at the 10 spot. Like I said, 8, 9, and 10 were really hard for me. Here's the list of teams I considered for the 8, 9, and 10 spots, okay? West Virginia, Florida, LSU, Texas, Washington, Washington State, Central Florida, Penn State, and Kentucky. Those are the teams I considered for 8, 9, and 10. That's a combination there of no-loss teams with UCF. Some of these teams have 2 losses, some have 3. Those are the teams I considered for 8, 9, and 10. I landed with Washington at the number 10 spot. Number 9, for me, it came down to Florida and LSU. Florida and LSU played during the regular season. It was on the road at Florida. But it was a really close game. One of those type of games that could have gone either way. They both have 3 losses. I think so. These are 2 pretty even teams, I think, in my opinion. I think LSU's got a better defense. I think Florida's probably got a better offense. This was a tough one for me. I think right now, today, Florida is playing better football than LSU. I have Florida at the 9 spot. I know LSU is pretty high in a lot of polls, and like I said, this isn't a trash talk video, okay? I'm not knocking either one of these teams. I'm not going to knock any teams in this video. 8, 9, and 10 were hard for me. I'm landing with Florida here at number 9, okay? I think Florida or LSU would beat Washington or Washington State at the 10 spot, right? And that's sort of what I'm going for here. Number 8, it came down to Texas or West Virginia. I've been high on West Virginia. Lost to Oklahoma in a shootout, but it's not just that. I thought West Virginia's defense would show up to play in that game. They didn't. They've given up 40 or more points in 3 of their last 4 games, so every week that goes by, they're looking more and more like a typical Big 12 team. Texas is one of the most inconsistent teams in America. They lose to Maryland, a couple of other boneheaded losses, and turn around and beat Oklahoma. Hard to pin these down here. I think if Texas and West Virginia played right now, I think West Virginia would win, so I have West Virginia in the 8 spot. I also think right now West Virginia would beat either Florida or LSU on a neutral field, and Washington State, or at least be favored over them. So that's where I landed with 8, 9, and 10. West Virginia, Florida, and Washington. All right, now we'll get to the top 7 here. And like I said, this was easier for me to do. Now, this doesn't mean that this is necessarily right. This is my opinion here on who I think would beat who if they played on a neutral field, or not who would beat who necessarily, but who would be favored. Of course, like I've said this once already, I'll probably say it another couple of times. Any team can beat any team. I get it. These are 10 good teams on this list, okay? And in reality, any team could beat any team on this list. But these are the way I think they would be favored. I don't know how else to put it. Number 7, Michigan. I know they had a bad game this past weekend against Ohio State, especially on defense. Offensively, they put up 39 points. If you'd have told people Michigan was going to score 39 against Ohio State, most people would have told you, well, that means they're going to win. But they didn't. Defense didn't show up. I'm not basing this poll on any one game. Body of work, okay? So Michigan's got an opening week loss to Notre Dame, at Notre Dame, close loss. considered to be one of the best losses in America this year by most people, considering what Notre Dame did the rest of the way. Hard to excuse this loss this past weekend at Ohio State, though. I know it was another road game, but still, Michigan's had this game circled all year. You have this game circled every year. Harbaugh had never beaten Ohio State. Harbaugh had never finished higher than third in the division. He never won the division, never won the Big Ten. This was the year. Michigan was clearly the better team heading into this game. It didn't work out that way for Michigan. I have them at 7. I think Michigan would be favored right now over Texas and West Virginia. I think Michigan would be favored right now over Florida and LSU. And I think Michigan would be favored right now over Washington State on a neutral field. I've got the Wolverines at 7. At number 6, Notre Dame. Like I said, this is not where I think teams deserve to be ranked. Obviously, Notre Dame deserves to be in the top 4 based on the way they rank these teams. Obviously, Notre Dame is going to the playoffs. So this isn't meant to insult any Notre Dame fans. This isn't one of those videos where I'm trying to get you to lose your mind in the comments section. Again, this is based on who I think would be favored to win over who on a neutral field. I think Notre Dame will be favored right now over Michigan, Texas, West Virginia, Florida, LSU, Washington State, and any other team pretty much on a neutral field. I have them at number 6. They're undefeated. They've looked really, really good at times this year, and they've looked pretty average at times this year. Let's just be honest, okay? That was not an impressive win against Southern Cal. I know it was on the road, but Southern Cal's a terrible team. They're 5-7 this year, missing a bowl game. Clay Helton on the hot seat out there. They're not a good team. Vandy honestly outplayed Notre Dame this year and should have won that game. Now, you can't go back and punish Notre Dame now because they should have won it. I'm just making a point here, trying to give you some reasoning of why I've got them where I have them. Ball State was another one. Then you go out and crush a pretty good Syracuse team, right? So you've looked really, really good. You've looked okay. You've looked in between at times. I think you would beat every other team or be favored against every other team we've named so far. I've got Notre Dame at 6. At number 5, I have Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma's offense is one of the best we've seen in a long time. I actually think Oklahoma's offense, and I've been saying this for most of the season, I think Oklahoma's offense is better this year than it was last year. That doesn't necessarily mean I think Kyler Murray's a better passer than Baker Mayfield, but he gives you he gives you a lot more with his legs than what Baker Mayfield gave you. Oklahoma's running back situation, especially up until Rodney Anderson got hurt, was elite. I mean, their running backs were great. They've got playmakers at wide receiver. I mean, you guys know all about Oklahoma's offense. I don't need to go over that with you. They're capable of scoring 40 points on any team in America, period. That includes Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, Georgia, any team you want to name. Their offense is that good. But their defense is honestly one of the worst in the Power 5. Again, this is not a trash talk video. But Oklahoma fans who are honest with themselves and honest with me, I've seen you in the comments section, admit Oklahoma's defense is embarrassing. Oklahoma fans are embarrassed by it. You don't fire your defensive coordinator halfway through a season because your defense is good. You do it because your defense is really bad. So bad that you can't even wait till the end of the season to make a change. You have to do it right in the middle of the season. Your defense is really, really bad. I do think you could probably beat Notre Dame on a neutral field, and I did sort of struggle. I mentioned the top 7 were pretty easy. I did struggle on where to put Notre Dame, so I had them a little higher at some points, but anyway, this is where I landed. But I do think Oklahoma would be favored against Notre Dame right now on a neutral field. I think it would probably be a pretty high-scoring game, but I'm not convinced that Notre Dame could keep up. That would probably be a good game, though. Honestly, you could match any of these teams up in the top 6, maybe even put Michigan in there. Any of these teams in the top 7, I think you could match up, and any team could win. But somebody's got to be favored. That's the criteria I'm going with here. I feel like Oklahoma right now would probably be favored over Notre Dame on a neutral field. I've got Oklahoma at 5. So at 4, I put Ohio State. Again, I have been hard on Ohio State all year. Some of it was the clowning Urban Meyer thing, but some of it was legitimate football clowning. I mean, you gave up how many yards and points to Purdue? Nebraska outplayed you, was beating you at halftime and into the third or fourth quarter. They're a terrible team. Was it overtime with Maryland? I think it was. So Ohio State has looked bad at times. First 3 weeks of the season, they looked good. Boat race Oregon State, even though they're terrible, but you did give up 31 to them. You beat TCU, which at the time looked like a pretty good win. Not so much now. TCU not as good as they have been in years past. But, I mean, the point is you've been kind of up and down too. I mean, every team has ups and downs, though. But, like I said, I'm making this based on who I think would be favored over who right now. The top 10 teams today, right now. And even though I don't base this solely off of any one game, it's a fact that Ohio State just played their best game of the year against Michigan. You can't totally discount that. So I'm including that performance against Michigan in this ranking system that I'm doing here. And I think Ohio State would probably be favored on a neutral field right now over Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Michigan, Texas or West Virginia, Florida or LSU, and Washington or Washington State. And for that reason, I've got them at number 4. At number 3, I have UGA. They have the one loss on the road to LSU. It was a good loss in that LSU is a pretty good team. It was a bad loss in that it wasn't really close. Now, the score doesn't tell the whole story of this game. If you watched the game, then you know that we were within 10 points of LSU with 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and we were in field goal range. A field goal would have made it a one-possession game with about 8.5 minutes to go. Of course, we took a huge sack, knocked us out of field goal range. We had to punt. LSU goes down and scores, and it was pretty much over from there. It was played at LSU. LSU had lost the week before at Florida. It was a must-win game for LSU. It was a crazy environment. LSU played its best game of the year. I don't think anyone would argue that. Georgia played its worst game of the year. I don't think anyone would argue that either. I know LSU beat Georgia, and you're saying, well, how can LSU be way down there at 9 or whatever and Georgia at 3? I mean, just use your brain, people. Just because one team beats one team doesn't mean they would beat that one team again. That's just not how football works. If you watch the NFL and you see these division games, I mean, how many times do the Falcons go 1-1 in a season against the Panthers, or the Cowboys go 1-1 against the Giants? These are just things that happen in football. Teams, I've mentioned it with the rest of these teams. Teams tend to go up and down in a season. Right now, Georgia's playing some of the best football they've played all year. They've scored on something like 16 of their last 17 possessions over the last couple of games. Their offense is clicking. They're good through the air. They're good on the ground. We're going to have 2,000-yard running backs again this year. Unbelievable. I mean, that's hard to do. You can clown on it if you want. I don't know. We had 2,000-yard running backs last year. Chubb and Michelle. First time it's ever happened at the University of Georgia in 140 years. And now we're about to do it again for the second year in a row. So the ground game is clicking. Fromm is completing passes at a high percentage. Listen, Jake Fromm's no world beater. I'm not an idiot here, okay? He doesn't have a world-class arm. He doesn't have an arm like Trevor Lawrence. He can't run around like Tua. I get all that. But for what Jake Fromm is, he's really, really good. And between the ears, there's not a quarterback in America that's better than Jake Fromm. There's some that are just as good, maybe, but Jake Fromm is elite between the ears. His arm strength and his mobility, that just is what it is. But he's always going to get Georgia into the right play, out of the wrong play. He makes the right read way more times than he makes the wrong read, and he protects the football, very few turnovers. It is what it is. He's playing really, really good right now. Defense coming around. We got a great We're great against the pass. Got some work to do against the run. But a lot like last year, though, Georgia is playing some of its best football of the season towards the end of the year when it matters most. I feel like right now, if you matched UGA up with any other team we've named on this list on a neutral field, I think UGA would be favored in that game. Doesn't mean Georgia would win. So if you're an Ohio State fan or an Oklahoma fan or a Notre Dame fan or Michigan or any of these other teams, I'm not necessarily saying Georgia would beat you. I feel like if these teams got matched up right now, Georgia would be the favorite, whether that's 1 point or 10 points or whatever. That's not the point I'm making. I just feel like Georgia would be favored on a neutral field over these teams. And if Georgia, whether Georgia wins or loses this weekend, they're going to play somebody on this list. My bet right now would be Oklahoma. If Georgia loses, you're probably looking at Georgia and Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl. It's a great feeling to be 11-1, headed to the SEC championship, knowing that if you win, we're headed to the playoffs. And the Sugar Bowl is not a bad deal for a backup plan. Plenty of teams will be happy to trade places with UGA right now, I promise you that. But I've got Georgia at 3rd. I've got Clemson at 2. I think Clemson would be favored over Georgia. I think they'd be favored over Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Michigan, every other team on this list. Clemson has looked really, really good at times. Trevor Lawrence is an elite quarterback. Listen, Trevor Lawrence is one of the best 5 quarterbacks in college football right now. He's a true freshman, and he's only started, 6 games, 7 games. He didn't get the start. He was named starter week 5, right? So he started 8 games. He's elite. He is going to light it up for the next the rest of this year and the next 2 years at Clemson. This guy, he's NFL ready right now. He's that good. The defense with Clemson, though, has been a little bit head-scratching this year. And again, this isn't a trash talk video, but there's been a couple of games, if you've watched Clemson play, where it just seems like they can't stop the other team. And the talent on Clemson's defense can rival anyone in America. Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Auburn, Florida, whatever elite defensive teams you want to name. Clemson's got as much or more talent as any of those teams, particularly their front 7. But even the back end, Clemson is very talented, but there's been times this year where they've had trouble, particularly stopping the pass, which could be a problem for Clemson, I think, if they face Bama. Now, they have an elite defensive front, so getting pressure on Tua would be key there. But anyway, getting way ahead of ourselves here. But the point is, Clemson is a really, really good team. They're undefeated. They've been favored in every game this year. They've been almost all blowouts. But you look at the Texas A&M game, a lot of passing yards given up there in a close game. Even the South Carolina game this past weekend. Did you really let Jake Bentley throw for 510 yards? That's hard to justify that. Clemson, I know, I get it. It's a rivalry game, and you won by 3 touchdowns, so it's not like the game was in doubt. But I don't know. You have to have a little bit of concern, I think, if you're a Clemson fan, about the team ranked ahead of you when you're that bad against the pass. I mean, say what you want about Georgia. Clemson and Georgia defensively are sort of opposites, right? Clemson can shut the run down, and that they've got an elite front 4 that can pressure the quarterback, but it seems like they can't cover in the back end. You look at Georgia, we have a top 5, top 10 pass defense in America, but it's all because of the back end. We've struggled getting pressure on the quarterback this year. So sort of opposite situations going on there with Clemson and Georgia's defense. But listen, Clemson would be favored on a neutral field over anybody on this list with the exception of Alabama, and I don't think anybody would argue that. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean Clemson would win. So if you want to say, well, Oklahoma could beat Clemson or Notre Dame or Ohio State or Georgia or even Florida, whoever you want to say, of course they could. But again, you're kidding yourself if you don't think Clemson would be a favorite over any other team on this list other than number 1, which obviously is Bama. And we all know Bama would be favored over anyone in America. We see those articles all the time where they say, well, Vegas, if Bama were to play Clemson today, they'd be an 11-point favorite or whatever it is. We all know, so it's no surprise here. Bama coming in at number 1. Now, my personal opinion on Alabama, they have looked like the best team in America for the majority of the season. There's been a few weeks where you looked at Alabama and kind of went, well, what's going on? But mostly they've looked like the best team all season long, and it's hard really to argue that. If you're trying to look for weaknesses, or I don't know where you would find them on Alabama's team, to be honest. But even their running game, which people say, well, the running game just doesn't seem like it's what it used to be at Alabama. Hard to know if that's because they can't or because they've got Tua throwing for 300 a game in the first 2.5 quarters, and so they just don't need to run the ball. Hard to know. Defensively, I still don't think defensively Alabama is as good as some of the Nick Saban defenses we've seen over the last 10 years. But again, they're scoring 15 points, 20 points more a game than what Alabama used to score under Nick Saban. Nick Saban used to get the best game-managing quarterback he could find, who never turned the ball over, right? He'd let him throw the ball 16, 17, 18 times a game for 180 yards. He would run teams to death. He would just make them surrender, pounding, and had a smothering defense and won a whole bunch of games at Alabama by 28-10, 35-17, stuff like that. Now they're giving up a few more points, but they're scoring in the 50s and 60s, it seems like, almost every single week, right? 50-something to 28 or whatever. They gave up 31 to Arkansas, stuff like that. But Alabama's defense is not bad. Don't get it twisted. When you look at Alabama, they remind me of last year's Oklahoma offense, but with a way better defense, and that's scary for the rest of the teams on this list, right? I mean, Oklahoma had the best offense in America last year. Georgia was able to beat them in the playoffs in the Rose Bowl, outscoring them because their defense is just absolutely pitiful, pathetic, and piss poor, just like it is this year. Alabama doesn't have that problem. Now, you're really splitting hairs when you're talking about Alabama's defense not being as good as it was in some of the years past under Saban. So instead of having the #1 defense in America, maybe Alabama's top 5 or top 10. The defense is still loaded with talent. But like I said, I don't think anybody would argue that they would currently be favored over any one of those other teams on a neutral field, and that's how I came up with the list. So again, this wasn't a trash talking video, so I hope you don't take it that way. That's just my honest feelings on how teams would be matched up if they played today. It's possible I'm wrong, obviously, and like I said, anybody on that list could beat any other team on that list on any given day, and I get that. But you got to have some sort of criteria if you're going to sit down and make one of these top 10 lists. I did my best to explain the criteria I used to you guys, but feel free to let me know where I'm wrong in the comment section below. Today's Tuesday, so we got a live show tonight at 10 p.m. Y'all join us over there. We have a lot of fun. I take phone calls from you guys and talk some college football. Anyway, until next time, y'all take it easy and have a good morning. And two.